This is A Third of Us, your gateway to the unreached.
Presented by the Alliance for the Unreached, mobilizing believers to take the gospel to the least reached and unengaged around the world.
For more than 20 years, our host has committed his life to this cause.
Here's Greg Kelley, CEO of World Mission.
Kelley, and we are coming again with A Third of Us. You can see I'm not by myself, with a new friend, Mr. Steve Coffey, who is the U.S. Director at Christar. Great ministry you're going to hear all about today. Steve, it's great to have you with us on A Third of Us.
Thank you so much. It's a joy to be with you.
So you guys have got a very fun mission statement, Steve. I love it because you guys are all about kind of kingdom partnering together. You've got different ministries that you work with. But before we jump into exactly what Christar does, I find your history fascinating as far as kind of how it started. You gave me some origins. We're going back to the early 1900s, Hong Kong, and now this amazing ministry's kind of birthed out of that. So go back to those early days, brother. I know you weren't around, so we all get that. But tell us in the early 1900s what that original seed of your ministry was.
Sure. There are a number of streams of our history that we love to look back to as God has worked in the lives of individuals. One was what was started in 1930 by a cloth salesman in India. And he had a burden for reaching the Indian population, and he started what was then called the India Mission. And that in time was merged into some other organizations, or other organizations joined in with the India Mission. But the one that goes back to the early 1900s that you're referring to was started by a single lady who went to Hong Kong with $40 and a typewriter in 1909. $40 was her passage, just to get established, and a typewriter to make a living, a true marketplace worker. And her burden was to reach the people living on boats in the Hong Kong harbor. Oh my gosh. Harbor. And she did. And by God's grace, churches were established not only in Hong Kong area, but up into southern China. And eventually an organization was developed called the South China Boat Mission, and that merged into the India Mission. And the name changed to International Missions Incorporated. Okay. And eventually we changed our name to Christar.
Okay. So, and when did that whole sort of progression happen, the Christar? When did that sort of emerge as the main name?
That came about in the 90s. International Missions is about as generic of a name as you can find. Our mobilizers would go to campuses and say, "Hey, we're with International Missions," and the students would go, "Great, which one?" Oh, that was it. Yeah.
I can relate because our name is World Mission, so I could
totally similar type of situation. Yeah. And then the situation from what was normal in a mobilizing context was accentuated when the Southern Baptists changed the name of their mission branch to the International Mission Board. Okay. And our president back in the 90s talked of the times when we'd get these checks that went to the International Mission Board. And, that really kind of puts the motivations to test when you get this money that is supposed to be for someone else. But anyway, he always sent them on to the rightful recipient.
Wow, what an exciting! Not many people have that kind of legacy and heritage that you guys do. So I'm sure that at a certain point there was an attraction in your own life. Like, I need to be a part of this. At what point did you sort of intersect your life with this great work?
Well, appreciate you asking, because my wife and I met at Liberty University, and I actually was working in the missions department at Liberty University and got to visit with all kinds of organizations, their representatives that came through, and we encountered what was then International Missions. And one of the things that absolutely grabbed our attention as we talked with all the different organizations, International Missions, now Christar, had a very unique requirement, and that is every family going out, if you're single individual going out, must have 100 daily prayer partners.
Oh, love it. Wow.
And we knew having before that served in a project from Liberty University in Sudan, having had a glimpse of what it's like to live and work in that type of context, recognized that we needed all the prayer support we could have.
Yes.
And we had no inhibitions in going out and mobilizing people to pray. And over the years, God has raised up for all of our workers, just this army of people who are praying. And some people wonder, well, are they really praying? I could tell story after story after story of how God works through the prayers of his people to accomplish his purposes all around the world through our coworkers. And we're blessed to have that type of network of partners like that.
And the Lord honors that, because that was his first call to action. You know, so many times when we look at the Great Commission where he says, go, that's the action word we all love. And rightly so. I mean, it's a powerful word. And we all sort of get behind that, the Great Commission and go, and we should associate the two. But I talk to people and remind them frequently that before Jesus called us to go, he came down and he looked out at the harvest field and he said, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, pray to the Lord of the harvest to send. So, I mean, that was the action word before you go. And so I love that about your guys' focus. Over the years now, obviously you've moved beyond just the boats in the harbor in Hong Kong in a big way. You had told me that you're in some 35 countries and you're zeroed in on this cause that we believe so passionately about here at A Third of Us, of the unreached. So how did that sort of trajectory happen with the work at Christar to make that focus? I mean, that's a commitment. That's a commitment. You're not going into Christian orphanages in Guatemala and Haiti. And if that's, there's great works that are doing those kind of things, but this is kind of a heavy lift. And to be so dedicated to that part of the world, Steve, unpack that for us a little bit about that determination.
Well, it really comes from our people who started the different organizations that now comprise Christar. It's a part of our DNA. From Benjamin Davidson, who as a cloth salesman in India, who had a burden for the Hindu population around him, to another man in Iran who served among Iranians and the Iran Interior Mission that was started from that, to a lady who leaves her home in Canada and goes to South Asia, to Hong Kong. This is our heritage, and it's reproduced through the years. And those who join and affiliate with Christar and these ministries are those people in whom God has put a burden and a desire and a love for people who have no access to a church in their own language and culture where they can worship our great Savior.
Why do you think that's so important? I mean, if you're just talking to someone who's been in church maybe their whole life, and you're telling them that there's need in abundance for churches in their own culture, in their own setting, and people are not having access to the gospel, they'd probably be like, come on, in 2022, that's impossible. We got satellites, we've got, all this money that's going into missions. It's impossible for someone to be in that situation or that reality of no access to the gospel. What would you tell that person?
I would tell them, I'd start asking them some questions about some individuals around the world that the average person here in North America has never heard about. Now, in today's world, in today's context, pretty much across the country, everyone's heard of Putin and his leadership in Russia, because that's all over the news. But you don't have to go far at all to start asking some questions. Who is this person? Who is that person? And they say, well, I've never heard of that person. And yet there is a bounty of information about them. Yeah. But because there's information about someone does not in any way mean that people actually recognize who that is and what their importance is. Well, if that's true of someone living today in the midst of this world with all of the media capacity that there is, ask what it means to ask someone about someone who lived 2,000 years ago and his life. Yeah. And then you start to have an understanding that, just because there's capacity for people to be aware of someone has no correlation with the reality of not only them knowing about him, but hearing the message of the treasure of the gospel in a way that they understand and why that person was so important.
Yeah, that's a beautiful correlation. And that's what you're doing at Christar. This is Steve Coffey, who's the U.S. director of this good work. Steve is based in Texas. Steve, what are you most proud about as Christar, as you guys are making your mark, you're following Jesus, being a part of seeing these transformational communities where he is unknown. I can't think of a higher calling, and we believe passionately about that at a third of us. But what are you proudest about as you think about the work that you do every single day from that chair?
That's a very good question. I'm going to rephrase it a little bit based on a question that was actually asked of me a number of years ago. And it is something that I'm thankful for and proud of because of what has taken place over the years in our organization. Here's the question. A young couple came and set up ahead of time a visit with us and wanted to talk to us about Christar. They were exploring different organizations. They had sensed the leading of God in their lives to serve him cross-culturally in the Arab communities in the Middle East. And so we went to lunch together, and as we were eating a nice Mexican meal together, Dave asked me this question. He said, "Steve, what does it mean to be a success in Christar?" Now, no one had ever asked me that question before. I'd never haven't had that question asked of me since, but it's a good question. It's a very similar question. Yeah. What are you proud about? Because all of us want to have a purpose and a meaning that honors God. And if we were talking about the success of Christar, it's not about my personal building up. It's about God's glory, about his honor. And for an organization that has as its purpose statement to glorify God by establishing churches among the least reached, as a vision statement to cultivate Christ-honoring transformation in communities where he is yet to be worshiped, you would think that my response to him would be, well, to be a success in Christar would be to plant churches, to establish reproducing, mature, Christ-honoring, God-exalting churches in communities that did not have access to a church before. Sure. But that was not my answer to him. Actually, my answer to him was this: to be a success in Christar is to have a deeper love for God when you return from the field than when you left.
Wow. Powerful.
And the beauty of that reality is the Great Commission that we engage, that we've given our lives to, in a third of us and all the different organizations that are a part of it. We are committed to seeing the gospel proclaimed among the peoples of the earth. We're committed to making disciples of people from every ethne. But that's not the most important commandment. The greatest commandment is not the Great Commission. The greatest commandment comes long before that, spoken by God in Deuteronomy chapter 6. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. And Jesus said the same thing when the lawyer came to him and said, "What is the great commandment in the law?" His response was the very same response. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And so we believe from the core of who we are that the heart of the Great Commission is the Great Commandment. And I delight in hearing our co-workers express in their testimony the fact that even when they're serving in resistant areas, even when they're serving among resistant peoples, that the thing that keeps them connected, the things that keep them grounded where they are and faithful in the ministry, is not necessarily the results. And we delight when we see the results. But the most important part of them being there is it is an act of worship because they love the Lord their God.
Yeah, That's rich, man. That's rich. It reminds me of some of the guys that we work with in northern Nigeria, which of course, Boko Haram, Fulani herdsmen. I mean, it's just a chaotic mess there. Yep. You got to be pretty determined, courageous, and bold to be a missionary in these areas. And, those guys also have all of the sort of the knowledge and the access to all the hundreds of people groups in Nigeria, and, how many of them there are, the Kanuri, the Fulani, the Hausa. They have all that data. And so when we're talking to them, it's very interesting, and they do leadership training. Their first emphasis is not go to, hey, there's 32 million Hausa that are 98% Muslim, and we need to reach. The emphasis goes to your point, which is we believe and we're convicted that the church in Nigeria, the issue for all of the unreached people that remain in Nigeria, is a heart issue.
Yes.
And as the people in Nigeria more deeply fall in love with Jesus, the manifestation of that will be now a burden for those who have never had access to it. And it kind of sounds like that's what you're saying. Is that sort of
it does. I fully affirm what they're saying. I love one of my favorite authors these days is Michael Reeves, and I just came across a few days ago a quote of his that absolutely resonates with what these brothers in Nigeria are saying. Yeah. He said this: going out on mission is not the primary thing, it's the secondary thing. He said, I want first and foremost for you to love God so that your mission is nothing other than speaking to the world about who you love. Yeah. To go on God's mission is to speak of him out of a heart that is captivated by his beauty. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what these brothers in northern Nigeria are talking about. It's a hard issue. When we delight in God, it becomes normal to go. It becomes normal to obey. It becomes normal to share with others what the treasure is within our own heart.
Man. Steve, I can tell, brother, that fire is sort of oozing out of you. So we are glad that you're in that chair. I know people are inspired by your leadership, by your vision. And if they want to connect with Christar, what does that look like? How do you encourage people to get a hold of you guys?
Sure. Website, www.christar.org, CHRISTITAR.org. Info@christar.org gets a communication that will be answered promptly, and all the information, contact information is there, more about where we're serving and the types of things that we're doing and the way that God is at work in and through our coworkers. I love to tell our people that are connecting with us as an organization, we are one drop in the ocean of God's amazing work.
Yes.
We delight in what he's doing through us, but we're just one drop. He's doing so many things, and we're pleased, we're privileged to participate in his amazing work.
Yeah. Steve, hey, we're privileged to have you join us on A Third of Us, and you guys are connected to the Alliance for the Unreached. So we're grateful for that, because you're right. None of us can do this alone. Nope. We need each other. We need to connect. And, so for you as our audience, our faithful audience here at A Third of Us, you can go to athirdofus.com and you can connect with great organizations like Christar. You can learn more about this cause that Steve and I are talking about, which is a third of the world. That's why we're called A Third of Us. A third of the world remains without access to the gospel message. It's not that they're not a Christian. It's that there's no one who's ever gone there. There's no Bible. There's no missionary. There's no church. There's nothing that's making an attempt to reach them. So organizations like Christar and the many other dozens of organizations part of the Alliance, that's what we're all about. And certainly this podcast is a part of that. Steve, you've helped, I believe, educate and inspire our friends today. So thanks again for joining us.
It's our pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. We'll catch you next time. God bless.
All right. God bless.
This has been A Third of Us, your gateway to the unreached. Get involved in the movement, taking the gospel to the least reached and unengaged at athirdofus.org. Thanks for listening.